Hello, readers of the future. I'm Endragh. We're reading more of the light fantastic. We're getting to my favorite part. Well, not my favorite part, but one of my favorite parts of this book. So I'm excited. So we found out that Rincewind and Two Flower are no longer off the disc. They are back on through some magical mayhaps, perhaps. We don't know. Yet. Yeah, so they're stuck in the woods in the middle of the disc, unknown where, but we'll find out eventually. Alright. Oh, and a bunch of old wizards gathered together to, figure out stuff, I guess. The oldest wizard, Greyhold Sculp of the ancient and truly original sages of the Unbroken Circle, leaned heavily on his carven staff and spak thusly. Get on with it, Weatherwax. My feet are giving me gip. GYP, I don't know what that means. Galder, who had merely paused for effect, glared at him. Very well, then. I will be brief. Jolly good. We all sought guidance as to the events of this morning. Can anyone among us say he received it? The wizards looked sidelong at one another. Nowhere outside a trade union conference, nowhere outside of a trades union's conference fraternal benefit night can so much mature distrust and suspicion be found as among a gathering of senior enchanters. But the plain fact was that the day had gone very badly. Normally, information demons, summoned abruptly from the demon dimension, had looked sheepish and sidled away when questioned. Magic mirrors had cracked, tarot cards had mysteriously become blank, crystal balls had gone all cloudy, even tea leaves, normally scorned by wizards as frivolous and unworthy of contemplation, had clustered together at the bottom of the cup and refused to move. In short, the assembled wizards were at a loss. There was a great murmur of agreements. And therefore, I propose that we perform the rites of Askinet, said Galder dramatically. He had to admit that he had hoped for a better response, something along the lines of, well, no, not the rite of Askinet. Man, that was not meant to meddle with such things. In fact, there was a general murmur of approval. Good idea. Seems reasonable. Get on with it, then. Slightly put out, he summoned a procession of lesser wizards who carried various magical implements into the hall. It had already been hinted that around this time there was some disagreement among the fraternity of wizards about how to practice magic. Young wizards in particular went about saying that it was time that magic started to update its image and that they should all stop mucking about with bits of wax and bone and put the whole thing on a properly organized basis, with research programs and three-day conventions in good hotels where they could read papers with the titles like Whereithin Geomancy and The Role of Seven-League Boots in a Caring Society. Trymore, for example, hardly ever did any magic these days, but ran the order with hourglass efficiency and wrote lots of memos and had a big chart on his office wall, covered with colored blobs and flags and lines that no one really understood, but looked very impressive. The other type of wizard through all this was so much marsh gas and wouldn't have anything to do with an image unless it was made of wax and had pins stuck in it. The head of the eight orders were all of this persuasion, traditionalists to a mage, and the utensils that were heaped around the octagram had a defiant, no-nonsense occult look about them. Ram horns, skulls, baroque metalwork, and heavy candles were much in evidence, despite the discovery by young wizards that the rite of Ansk could perfectly well be performed with 3 small bits of wood and 4 centimeters of mouse blood. The preparations normally took several hours, but the combined power of the senior wizard shortened it considerably, and, after a mere 40 minutes, Galder chanted the final words of the spell. They hung in front of him for a moment before dissolving. The air in the center of the octagram shimmered and thickened, and suddenly contained a tall, dark figure, most of it was hidden by a black robe and hood, and this was probably just as well. It held a long scythe in one hand, and one couldn't help noticing that what should have been fingers were simply white bone. The other skeletal hand held small cubes of cheese and pineapples on a stick.
Well,
said Death in a voice that all the warmth and color of an said Death in a voice with all the warmth and color of an iceberg. He caught the wizard's gaze and glanced down at the stick.
I was at a party,
he added, a shade reproachful. "O creature of earth and darkness, we do charge thee to join from," began Galder in a firm, commanding voice. Death nodded.
Yes, I know all that,
he said.
Why have you summoned me?
It is said that you could see both the past and future, said Galder, a little sulkily, because the big speech of binding and conjuring was one he rather liked, and people had said he was very good at it.
That is absolutely correct.
Then perhaps you can tell us what exactly it was that happened this morning, said Galder. He pulled himself together and added loudly, I command this by Asmoteth, by Ticheleth, by...
All right, you've made your point,
said Death.
What precisely was it you wished to know? Quite a lot of things happened this morning. People were born, people died, all the trees grew a bit taller, ripples made interesting patterns on the sea.
I meant about the octave, said Galder coldly.
That? Oh, that was just a readjustment of reality. I understand that Octave was anxious not to lose the eighth spell. It was dropping off the disc, apparently.
Hold on, said Galder. He scratched his chin. Are we talking about the one inside the head of Rincewind? Tall, thin man, bit scraggly, the one...
That he has been carrying around all these years? Yes.
Galder frowned. It seemed a lot of trouble to go to. Everyone knew that when a wizard died, all the spells in his head would go free, so why bother to save Rincewind? The spell would just float back eventually. Any idea why? He said without thinking, and then remembered himself in time, adding harshly, By your piff and catchalard, I do adjourn thee and...
I wish you wouldn't keep doing that,
said Death.
All that I know is that all the spells have to be said together next hogwash night, or the disc will be destroyed.
Speak up there, demanded Greyholt's black spold. Shut up, said Galder.
Me?
No, him, Daffold. I heard that, snapped Spolder. You young people. He stopped. Death was looking at him thoughtfully, as if he was trying to remember his face. Look, said Galder, just repeat that bit again, will you? The disc will be what?
Destroyed,
said Death.
Can I go now? I left my drink.
Hold on, said Galder hurriedly. By Chittilith and Ozana and so forth, what do you mean destroyed?
It's an ancient prophecy written on It's an ancient prophecy written on the inner walls of the Great Pyramid of Tessort. The word destroyed, with quotation marks around it, seems quite self-explanatory to me.
That's all you can tell us?
Yes. Yes.
But Hogswatch Night is only 2 months away.
Yes.
At least you can tell us where Rincewind is now. Death shrugged. It was a gesture he was particularly well built for.
The Forest of Skald, rimward of the Ramtop Mountains.
What is he doing there?
Feeling very sorry for himself.
Oh.
Now may I go?
Galder nodded distractedly. He had been thinking wishfully of the banishment ritual, which started "Begone, foul shades," and had some rather impressive passages which he had been practicing, but somehow he couldn't work up any enthusiasm. Oh yes, he said. Thank you, yes. And then, because it was well not to make enemies even among the creatures of night, he added politely, I hope it is a good party. Death didn't answer. He was looking at Spold in the same way that a dog looks at a bone, only in this case, things were more or less the other way around. I hope it is a good party, said Galder loudly.
At the moment it is,
said Death levelly.
I think it might go downhill very quickly at midnight.
Why?
That's when they think I'll be taking my mask off.
He vanished, leaving only a cocktail stick and a short party streamer behind. So yeah, I really liked that scene. Hold on, I'm gonna pause quickly. Because it kind of like builds on Death's character. Like in the first book, he's very like rules, rules, rules. But in this one, it kind of shows that he's also like a kind of a kidder, or at least he's starting to. Boop. Okay. There has been an unseen observation of all this. It was, of course, entirely against the rules, but Trimon knew all about rules and had already considered they were for making, not obeying. Long before the 8 mages had gone down to some serious arguing about what the apparition had bleh. Long before the 8 mages had gone to some serious arguing about what the apparition had meant, he was down in the main levels of the university library. It was an awe-inspiring place. Many of the books were magical, and the important thing to remember about grimoires is that they are deadly in the hands of any librarian who cares about order, because he's bound to stick them all on the same shelf. This is not a good idea with books that tend to leak magic, because more than one or two of them together form a critical black mass. On top of that, many of the lesser spells are quite particular about the company they keep, and tend to express any objection by hurling their books viciously across the room. And of course, there is always the half-felt presence of the things from the dungeon dimension, clustered around the magical leakage and constantly probing the walls of reality. The job of magical librarian, who has to spend his working day in this sort of highly charged atmosphere, is a high-risk occupation. The head librarian was sitting on top of his desk, quietly peeling an orange, and was well aware of that. He glanced up when Trimor entered. "I'm looking for anything you've got on Pyramids of Tusk," said Trimon. He had come prepared. He took a banana out of his pocket. The librarian looked at it mournfully, and then flopped down heavily on the floor. Trimon found a soft hand poked gently into his, and the librarian led the way, waddling sadly between the bookshelves. It was like holding a little leather glove. Around them the books sizzled and sparked, with the occasional discharge of undirected magic flashing over to the carefully placed earthing rods nailed to the shelves. There was a tinny blue smell and just at the very limit of hearing, the horrible chittering of the demon creatures. Like many other parts of Unseen University, the library occupied rather more space than its outside dimension would suggest, because magic distorts space in strange ways, and it was probably the only library in the universe with Mobius shelves. But the librarian's mental catalog was ticking over perfectly. He stopped by a sorting stack of musty books and swung himself up into the darkness. There was the sound of rustling pages, and a cloud of dust floated down to Trimon. Then the librarian was back, a slim volume in his hand. "Ook," he said. Trimon took it gingerly. The cover was scratched and very dog-eared. The gold of its lettering had long ago curled off, but he could just make out, in the old magical tone of Torsk Valley, the words "Leist Griff Temple Hit Tors. Why Historie Mystical." "Ook," said the librarian anxiously. Trimon turned the pages cautiously. He wasn't very good at language. He'd always found them highly ineffective things, which by rights ought to be replaced by some sort of easily understood numeric system. But this seemed exactly what he was looking for. There were whole pages covered with meaningful hieroglyphs. "Is this the only book you've got about the Pyramid of Tors?" he said slowly. "Ook. You're quite sure?" "Ook." Trimon listened. He could hear, a long way off, the sound of approaching feet and arguing voices, but he had been prepared for that, too. He reached into a pocket. "Would you like another banana?" he said. The Forest of Skull was indeed enchanted, which was nothing unusual on the disc, and was also the only forest in the whole universe to be called, in the local language, "Your finger, you fool," which was the literal meaning of the word scund. The reason for this is regrettably all too common. When the first explorers from the warm lands around the Circle Sea traveled into the chilly hinterlands, they filled in the blank space on their maps by grabbing the nearest native, pointing at some distant landmark, speaking very clearly in a loud voice, and writing down whatever the bemused man told them. Thus were immortalized in general. Thus were immortalized in general. Thus were immortalized in generations of atlases with geographical oddities as just a mountain, geographical oddities as just a mountain, I don't know, what? And of course, your finger, you fool! Rain clouds clustered around the bald heights of Mount Ulshukun Hood. Who is this fool who does not know what a mountain is? And the luggage settled itself more comfortably under a dripping tree, which tried unsuccessfully to strike up a conversation. Two-Flower and Rincewind were arguing. The person they were arguing about sat on his mushroom and watched them with interest. He looked like someone who smelt like someone who lived in a mushroom, and that bothered Two-Flower. Well, why hasn't he got a red hat? Rincewind hesitated, desperately trying to imagine what Two-Flower was getting at. What? He said, giving in. He should have a red hat, said Two-Flower, and he certainly ought to be cleaner and more sort of jolly. He doesn't look like any sort of gnome to me. What are you going on about? Look at that beard, said Two-Flower sternly. I've seen better beards on a piece of cheese. Look, he's 6 inches high and lives in a mushroom, snarled Rincewind. Of course he's a bloody gnome. We've only got his word for it. Rincewind looked down at the gnome. Excuse me, he said. He took Two-Flower to the other side of the clearing. Listen, he said between his teeth. If he was 15 feet tall and said he was a giant, we'd only have his word for that too, wouldn't we? He could be a goblin, said Two-Flower defiantly. Rincewind looked back at the tiny figure, which was industriously picking his nose. Well, he said, so what? Gnome, goblin, pixie, so what? Not a pixie, said Two-Flower firmly. Pixies, they wear these sort of green combinations, and they have pointy caps and a little knobby antenna thingy sticking out of their heads. I've seen pictures. Where? Two-Flower hesitated and looked at his feet. I think it was called the The what? Called the what? The little man took a sudden interest in the backs of his hands. The little folks' books of alliteration. The little folks' book of flower. The little I can't even say this line now. The little folks' book of flower fairies, he muttered. Rincewind looked blank. It's a book on how to avoid them, he said. Oh, no, said Two-Flower hurriedly. I'll tell you where... It tells you where to look for them. I can remember the pictures now. A dreamy look came over his face, and Rincewind groaned inwardly. There was even a special fairy that came and took your teeth away. What, came and pulled out your actual teeth? No, you're wrong. I mean, after they'd fallen out. What you did was, you put the teeth under your pillow, and the fairy came and took it away and left a rehoon piece. Why? Why what? Why did it collect teeth? It just did. Rincewind formed a mental picture of some strange entity living in a castle made of teeth. It was the kind of mental picture you tried to forget, unsuccessfully. He said. Red hats. He wondered whether to enlighten the tourist about what life was really like when a frog was a good meal, a rabbit hole a useful place to shelter out of the rain, and an owl a drifting silent terror in the night. Moleskin trousers sounded quaint unless you personally had to remove them from their original owner when the vicious little sod was cornered in his burrow. As for red hats, anyone who went around a forest looking bright and conspicuous would only do so very, very briefly. He wanted to say, look, the life of gnomes and goblins is nasty, brutish, and short. So are they. He wanted to say all this, and couldn't, For a man with an itch to see the whole of infinity. For a man who had for a man with an itch to see the whole of infinity, Two-Flower never actually moved outside his own head. Telling him the truth would be like kicking a spaniel. Sweet, wheat, said a voice by his foot. He looked down. The gnome, who had introduced himself as Swirls, looked up. Rincewind had a very good ear for language. The gnome had just said, "I've got some newt sorbet left over from yesterday." "Sounds wonderful," said Rincewind. Sweetles gave him another prod in the ankle. "The other bigger, is he all right?" he said solicitously. "He's just suffering from reality shock," said Rincewind. "He's just suffering from reality shock," said Rincewind. "You haven't got a red hat by any chance?" "Weep! Just a thought. I know where... I should be doing a different voice for this. I'm not. "I know where there's some food for biggers," said the gnome. "And shelter, too. It's not far." Okay, so that's where I'll end today's episode. Yeah, so they're stuck in the woods. Wizards now know about them. And yes, it was the Octarain who were trying to make sure Rincewind didn't fall off the island. Why it brought back Two-Flower, I don't know. Maybe to encourage Rincewind? I don't know. Well, I have an idea, but I want to wait until I'm done with the book to assume that or answer that. Because I don't remember if they say any reason or if my reasoning is going to be a spoiler. Or my assumption is going to be a spoiler. So, we'll get to that at the end, But yeah, I've been Endragh. This has been The Light Fantastic by Terry Pratchett. I'll be a smile to your face, and we'll continue reading more tomorrow night. Night-night, guys.